Hey everybody, Miss Bissell or Aunt Tori here today for chapel. I'm going to be doing some Bible journaling so you guys can watch that as I share a little bit more about myself. And I want to start by reading the Bible verses that I am Bible journaling today, which can be found in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7 through 10. It says, "So to keep me from being conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given to me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from being conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong.'" I'm sure you know our theme this year is growing together in community. And I'm going to be super raw and honest with you and talk about one of my biggest weaknesses. And it has a lot to do with our theme of growing together in community, because I really struggle with growing together in community. Particularly the togetherness and the community part has always been really hard for me. When I was a little kid, I used to say, "I hate people." And my mom and dad would laugh and say, "No, you don't hate people. You hate groups of people or lots of people surrounding you or watching you, but you don't actually hate people." And yeah, that is true, but togetherness and community is really hard for me. And it has to do with something that kind of happened when I was around 12 or 13 years of age. Um, I started to have really bad anxiety, and it got worse and worse. And I had my first panic attack when I was in grade 9. I remember being in the halls of my high school and feeling so overwhelmed with anxiety that I wanted to hide, to scream, to run, to disappear, to do anything I could to get away, but I couldn't because my anxiety was so worse. Throughout high school, I struggled so badly with anxiety and fear and not wanting to be around other people and just feeling overwhelmed all the time. And I didn't tell anybody. No one knew. My parents didn't know. My family didn't know. My friends didn't know. Nobody knew I was hiding this huge, horrible weakness of anxiety and depression and fear. I went off to university and it just got worse. I had so many panic attacks. I would have 3 to 4 panic attacks a week, and sometimes they were so bad I couldn't even leave my house. Midway through university, I got diagnosed with something called agoraphobia, which is an anxiety disorder. Simply put, people who struggle with agoraphobia are the people that you hear about who can't leave their houses for years because their anxiety is so bad. And I thought to myself, is this what my life is going to look like? Is my anxiety and panic attacks just going to get worse and worse? Is my fear of community and togetherness just going to get so bad that I cannot leave my house? And inside my heart, I knew that that's not who God had designed me to be. I knew that that wasn't what God wanted for my life, to be locked away in my house, too afraid to be around people that I couldn't leave. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, we read about a thorn that was given to Paul in his flesh. And he doesn't tell us what the thorn is, but for me, that thorn was anxiety. I can't tell you the number of times I pleaded and begged with God to take the fear away from me, to make it all better, but he didn't. But what he did do for me was he said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." God's grace has been sufficient for me and has made all the difference in my life. When I was diagnosed with agoraphobia, I started telling people that I was struggling. I started being honest that I was having panic attacks and feeling fear. And a community of really strong believers came around me and supported me. I started getting help, talking about it, learning positive coping strategies to how to deal with my anxiety, and it made all of the difference. But the biggest thing that has made a difference in my anxiety and my coping strategies has been deepening my relationship with the Lord and having hope over fear. I remember in university, I would have anxiety that was so bad, and I felt overwhelmed all the time. I used to call my mom and tell her how overwhelmed I felt. I felt overwhelmed with my papers and anxieties about the future and fears over not doing well enough and stress over being around other people. And I would call my mom in tears. I would stand on the balcony of my apartment calling my mom and telling her I felt so overwhelmed I just couldn't do this. And you know what my mom would say every single time I called her? Have you spent time with Jesus? It didn't matter how many times I called her, or what time of the day I called her, or how stressed or anxious I was, or how many tears I shed. Every single time she would say to me, have you spent time with Jesus? And to be really honest, I hated it. It infuriated me. Sometimes I would say, I don't have time to spend time with Jesus. And you know what she would say to me again? Have you spent time with Jesus? I got so angry sometimes that I would slam the phone down and hang up on her because I didn't have time to spend time with Jesus. I was so overwhelmed. I would go back to my books, my papers, my essays, my studying, and sometimes I just felt so overwhelmed I couldn't do it. And I would give up and I would say, you know what? I'm going to spend time with Jesus just to prove to my mom that it won't make a difference. And every single time I took a little bit of space for my papers, my exams, my worries about the future and people, and spent time with Jesus, it gave me more time. It did make a difference. It made me feel better. It calmed the fears and anxieties, and it gave me hope. Struggling with anxiety makes me feel hopeless sometimes. But when the thorn in my side seems too much, I'm reminded that His grace is sufficient for me. For when I am weak, He is strong, and His grace can be seen in my life when I trust Him. I was reading this book and I wanted to read this quote to you. I am grateful to my friend Kathy Keller for reminding me that God doesn't give us hypothetical grace, but only actual grace. The point is that when we imagine all of the worst case scenarios, we are imagining them without the presence and the grace of God that would be there if they actually happened. As Kathy wrote in an email once, God doesn't play that game. He doesn't inject hypothetical grace into hypothetical nightmare situations so that you would know what it actually feels like if it ever did end up happening. But God doesn't give us hypothetical grace, but only actual grace. And He promises to give us grace and that His grace will be sufficient for us. The truth is, my anxiety and fear about the future, my anxiety and fear of being in groups of people, my stress over those things makes me imagine the worst case scenarios. And that made me feel so overwhelmed that I wouldn't even want to approach the world because I was overwhelmed with how I might feel. But God doesn't inject hypothetical grace into those situations, but only actual grace when we actually are in the situations. And as it says in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in your weakness. We aren't perfect. We are weak sometimes, and it's okay to need help sometimes. But God's grace is sufficient in each and every single one of those situations. He is strong when we are weak, and other people can see how strong He is when we are willing to be honest about what we're struggling with. The truth is, I don't know what thorns you have in your side, whether it's anxiety, fear, depression, something else, an addiction, feeling overwhelmed about the future. I don't know what it is. But what I do know is that God injects actual grace into the situations where you need Him, and His grace is sufficient for you. And so, yeah, maybe growing together in community has always been really hard for me, specifically the togetherness and the community. But when I am open and honest with my community, with where I am struggling, God has brought the people that I need to help me see that I just need to spend a little time with Jesus. And that when I do, He promises to be there for me. He also promises to be there for you too.